12 honeybees will spend their entire lives to make 1 teaspoon of honey. Not a season, not a shift. Their whole existence spent flying for a single spoonful. Right now, spread across the planet, more than 80 million managed hives are running that same operation, each one holding tens of thousands of workers. That means the honey sitting in your kitchen cupboard was built by a workforce measured in the billions. And almost every one of them is dead before the jar is even sealed. To fill just 1 pound of it, bees will visit close to 2 million flowers and fly more than 55,000 miles combined. That is not a rounding error. That is the actual flight log, stitched together one short round trip at a time. By a creature that lives about 6 weeks total, before this teaspoon ever reaches a squeeze bottle. It has to pass through wax cells, a heated knife, a spinning steel drum, settling tanks, fine filters, a bottling line, and a label, and then into a global market where fake honey can now be made faster than real bees can ever fly. This is what it costs to make something most people pour without thinking. Inside each of those hives lives 1 queen, a few hundred drones.
Chacha, आज मेरी चीमी दृढ़ हो रहा है.
And tens of thousands of female workers who do essentially everything. Forage, nurse, build, guard, and eventually make honey. A strong colony can hold 50,000 bees at the height of summer, which is one reason the math scales into billions so fast. None of it is actually made for us. Bees make honey to survive winter, when the flowers disappear and nothing else will feed the colony. Everything a beekeeper ever collects is simply the surplus, the part the hive didn't need. It starts with a tongue. A honeybee's proboscis unrolls like a straw and draws nectar out of a flower,
storing it not in her stomach, but in a second chamber, built only for carrying what beekeepers call the honey stomach.
She visits dozens of flowers, sometimes over 100, before that chamber is full, and she turns back toward home. A returning scout will often perform something biologists call the waggle dance first. A figure-8 movement that encodes the direction of a flower patch relative to the sun and roughly how far away it is. Unseen, inside the hive, she does not swallow what she is carrying. She passes it, mouth to mouth, to another worker waiting near the entrance, who passes it to another. Each exchange adds enzymes that break the nectar's sugars apart and strips away a little more water.
Thousands of tiny transfers, bee to bee, until the liquid lands inside a wax cell. At that point, it is still nectar, not honey.
Thin and watery, close to 70% water, nearer to weak tea than the thick gold most people picture. So the colony fixes that. The only way it can, it fans the water out.
Hundreds of workers line the combs and beat their wings, generating airflow that pulls moisture from the open cells for hours, sometimes days, until it drops below 20%. Only then is it honey. Only then do the bees cap it, sealing each cell under a thin wax lid. That wax cap is the bee's own quality control seal.
And it is the one signal every beekeeper is trained to wait for. All of this happens inside a wooden box beekeepers call a super.
Each one holds 10 to 12 removable frames. Thin sheets of wax the bees cover, cell by cell. Lifts the lid of a hive without lighting his smoker first. 40 years into this work, he trusts his ears before his hands. A healthy box hums in a register he says he can recognize with his eyes closed. Pull that wax cap too early, before the water content has actually dropped, and the honey inside will ferment right there in the jar.
That's why a beekeeper checks frame after frame, sometimes for months, before pulling a single box for harvest. Some testing moisture directly with a handheld refractometer. Beekeepers have used smoke to work a hive this exact way for at least 4,500 years. Some testing moisture directly with a handheld refractometer. Beekeepers have used smoke to work a hive this exact way for at least 4,500 years. Some testing moisture directly with a handheld refractometer. Beekeepers have used smoke to work a hive this exact way for at least 4,500 years.
Smoke masks the alarm signal bees release when disturbed. buying a few calm minutes to work. When harvest day comes, a beekeeper pulls a frame straight out of the super, and it sags slightly under its own weight. A fully capped frame can hold 4 or 5 pounds of honey. It's checked for stray bees, then carried into a separate building beekeepers simply call the honey house. There, a heated knife slides across the wax, shaving the cap off in one motion and exposing wet, glistening honey underneath. Cell by cell, without wrecking the comb itself, because that same comb gets handed straight back to the bees to refill next season. Those sliced-off cappings aren't wasted either. Melted down and filtered, they become raw beeswax. Sold on to candle makers, cosmetics companies, and furniture polish producers. A small, steady secondary income. Most people watching never think to ask about. Not every box makes it that far. Opened a hive that should have held 15,000 bees and heard nothing. The frames were heavy, honey still capped inside, wax untouched. But every worker was gone, wiped out by mites that had stopped responding to treatment.
A colony he'd checked healthy in the fall simply did not exist by spring. Multiply that single hive by an...
Look around you. The health of the hive depends entirely on the quality of the air. It has to be pristine.
And you get what beekeepers now call the worst year of honeybee losses ever recorded.
Weak hives face a smaller, faster version of the same danger. Open one at the wrong moment, and bees from stronger colonies nearby
will scent the exposed honey and start robbing it outright, stripping a struggling hive of its last reserves within hours.
About 1 in 3 bites of food eaten worldwide depends on animal pollination. Honeybees, chief among them. Part of why a single brutal season for hives ripples straight into grocery prices, for crops that have nothing to do with honey at all. Titionins. The uncapped frames go next into a machine called an extractor, a stainless steel drum that spins them at high speed, and onto the drum walls in a fine gold spray, where it slides down and pools at the bottom, draining out through a tap at the base. Before the centrifuge existed, harvesting honey meant destroying everything. For most of human history, people simply crushed the wax comb to press the honey free,
killing weeks of the bee's own construction work in the process.
The extractor, patented in the 1860s, was the first method that let a beekeeper take the honey and hand the comb straight back.
What drains out still carries fragments of wax, flecks of pollen, the odd trapped bee leg.
Smaller operations run it through a simple mesh strainer into a settling tank, where it sits for a day or two while bubbles and heavier debris rise or sink on their own.
A thin foam skimmed off the top before bottling. That produces what most people call raw honey. Cloudier, quicker to crystallize, still carrying its pollen.
Large commercial processors go further. The honey is gently warmed, so it flows faster through a series of increasingly fine commercial filters.
Until it runs perfectly clear. That clarity is also the problem. Filtering out the pollen this thoroughly
means investigators can no longer trace some bottled honey back to a flower, a region, or even a country, once the one thing that would have proven its origin is gone.
By the time it reaches the filling nozzle, the honey no longer looks like something insects made in darkness. It looks like a product.
From there, it's a bottling line. Honey pumped through a nozzle into row after row of jars. Caps twisted on, labels applied, cases sealed and rolled out the door. Depending on scale, that final stretch can happen in an afternoon.
Or stretch across an entire harvest season, handled 1 5-gallon bucket at a time.
Globally, all of this adds up to roughly 1.8 million metric tons of honey a year, worth an estimated
China alone accounts for close to a quarter of that supply. Here's the number that surprises most people. For a great many commercial beekeepers, the real product was never honey. It was pollination. Pettis trucks his own colonies south for almond bloom most Februaries, same as the majority of his peers.
Not because he loves the work, but because that contract is what makes the rest of his year possible. Each February, semi-trucks loaded with roughly 400 colonies apiece
roll through the night so the bees stay calm and contained until they're unloaded at sunrise.
Into a bloom that cannot set a single almond without them. Growers pay somewhere between $150 and $240 per colony for a few weeks of pollination.
Multiplied nationwide, that adds up to an estimated $15 to $20 billion a year in American agriculture, dwarfing the honey crop itself.
None of that comes free either. Keeping a single hive alive costs a beekeeper somewhere between $100 and $200 a year before a single jar is sold. And the honey itself sells for far less than most people assume reaches the beekeeper. Once a packer and a brand have both taken their cut, Pettis doesn't lean on honey sales to keep his operation running. Not anymore. Most seasons, the almond contract is what keeps things solvent. The honey crop is what's left over. Sold mostly direct to people who already know him. That kind of direct trust matters more than it should have to. Because a lot of what's sold as honey never came from a hive at all. Honey is often ranked among the most adulterated foods on Earth. Alongside olive oil and milk, testing across different markets has repeatedly found suspicious honey on store shelves. And one European investigation flagged nearly half of sampled honey imports as possibly cut with cheap sugar syrup, filtered hard enough to erase the pollen that would prove it. Federal investigators uncovered exactly that kind of scheme in a case nicknamed Honeygate. Estimates put the damage to legitimate American beekeepers from this kind of fraud at close to $1 billion over just a handful of recent years. Not managing. An 8,000-year-old cave painting in Spain shows a figure scaling a cliff on a rope ladder toward a wild nest, basket in hand.
In the mountains of Nepal, the Gurung people still climb that same way today.
Using handmade rope ladders to reach cliffside nests 3 times the size of a managed hive. The oldest method on Earth, still running in parallel with the newest one. Sealed honey found inside Egyptian tombs over 3,000 years old was still edible when archaeologists finally opened it. Honey may be the only food that never truly spoils, thanks to its low water content and an enzyme the bees add themselves, producing just enough natural hydrogen peroxide to keep bacteria from ever taking hold. Fermented instead of eaten, that same honey became mead, one of humanity's oldest alcoholic drinks. Force. That permanence is exactly why losing the source behind it is so hard to sit with. That teaspoon sitting in your kitchen, whatever actually ended up in the jar. It might be the real thing, extracted, settled, and bottled by someone like Pettis, who still trusts the hum of a hive over the smoke that calms it. Or it might be sugar syrup, wearing honey's label, filtered hard enough to strip out the one thing, pollen, that could prove where it actually came from. Right now, more managed hives are dying in a single season than at any point since anyone started counting them. And the fraud quietly filling that gap is far easier to manufacture than the real thing ever was.
12 bees, 1 teaspoon, an entire life each. Honey itself may never spoil. The bees who make it are not guaranteed the same.